3 days ago, I was standing in my backyard in Kansas City trying to light birthday candles before the wind killed them again. My 6-year-old had frosting all over his hands, Ryan was working the grill, and for the first time in a long time, life actually felt safe. Not perfect safe, loud, messy, normal safe. Kids were running across the grass in wet socks from the inflatable slide. Somebody had country music blasting too loud through a Bluetooth speaker, and I remember thinking how strange it still felt to have the kind of home I used to pray for as a teenager. Then the side gate opened. I looked up automatically, expecting another daycare parent running late. Instead, I saw my father standing there holding a birthday gift bag with cartoon tissue paper sticking out of the top, like that somehow gave him the right to walk back into my life again. I hadn't seen him in 16 years, not after he threw me out at 16, not at my wedding, not when Ethan was born, but there he was, smiling at my little boy like he belonged there, like he had every right in the world to call himself family. And I swear, the whole backyard went quiet inside my chest before anyone else even realized something was wrong. The strange thing is, the second I saw him standing there beside my son, I wasn't angry first. I was 16 again. My name is Lauren Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and people always imagine abandonment as screaming or slammed doors or somebody storming out in the middle of the night. Mine wasn't like that. That's probably why it stayed buried inside me for so long. My father ended my childhood the same way somebody cancels cable service. Calm voice. No emotion, like he was handling paperwork. My parents had already been divorced a few years by then, and by the time I started junior year of high school, he already had a newer life that looked cleaner without me in it. New house out in the suburbs, new girlfriend, new routines. Even the house smelled different after she moved in. Different laundry detergent, different food in the fridge, different rules about where I could sit and what counted as attitude. And little by little, I stopped feeling like somebody's daughter. I started feeling like a guest who stayed too long after a holiday weekend. The night everything finally cracked was a Thursday in October. Cold enough that people had started wearing Chiefs hoodies again. I came downstairs because I heard cabinet doors shutting too hard in the kitchen. My father was standing there with his travel mug and car keys like he was already halfway out the door. He didn't yell. That's the part people never really understand. If he had screamed at me, maybe I could have hated him easier. Maybe it would have sounded emotional, temporary, human. Instead, he just looked tired, irritated, like I was one more monthly bill he didn't want sitting around anymore. He said, "Lauren, you need to start figuring things out for yourself." I honestly thought he meant chores or getting a part-time job. Then he said, "I can't keep carrying you." I remember laughing once because the sentence didn't even make sense in my head. I was 16 years old. I still needed rides to school. Half the girls in my grade still slept with stuffed animals on their beds. And this man was talking to me like I was a divorced roommate refusing to pay rent. I asked him what he meant. He took a sip of coffee before answering. I can still hear the sound of the lid clicking against the cup. Then he told me I needed to find somewhere else to stay. Just like that. No apology. No build-up. No, we'll figure this out together. Nothing. I kept waiting for the next sentence. The normal parent sentence. The one where he realized he'd gone too far. But it never came. I asked where I was supposed to go. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. Said I was smart enough to figure something out. And I remember staring at his face trying to recognize my father in it, because suddenly he looked like a stranger wearing my father's skin. I asked about school, clothes, food, money. I asked him if he understood I was still legally a kid. He told me I was being dramatic. And honestly, that sentence stayed with me longer than almost anything else, because once somebody teaches you your pain is inconvenient, you start apologizing for hurting it all. He gave me 10 days, 10 days to pack my things, stop making his life difficult, and disappear into whatever future I could scrape together for myself. I barely slept after that. I'd lie awake staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to my ceiling from when I was little, trying to understand how somebody goes from kissing your forehead goodnight to treating you like dead weight. At school, I walked around in a fog pretending everything was normal. Algebra, cafeteria pizza, pep rally posters hanging in the hallway. The whole world kept moving like my life hadn't just split open beside a half-empty coffee pot. Then one afternoon in the parking lot, my best friend found me crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. And honestly, that moment probably saved my life. Her name was Megan Sullivan, and honestly, I don't think she fully understands what she did for me that afternoon, just by refusing to walk away. She kept asking what was wrong, and I kept saying, "I'm fine," the way kids do when their whole world is falling apart and they're embarrassed somebody noticed. But Megan had known me since middle school. She knew when I was lying. And once I finally told her enough of the story, her whole face changed. Not uncomfortable, not awkward, angry. The kind of angry good people get when they hear something that should never happen to a kid. That night, her parents invited me over for dinner. I almost didn't go because by then, shame was already living inside me like a second heartbeat. I kept thinking maybe I was making everything sound worse than it really was. Maybe I was overreacting. That's what happens when somebody spends long enough teaching you your pain is inconvenient. I remember sitting at their kitchen table while Karen Sullivan passed around mashed potatoes and grilled chicken, like it was the most normal Thursday night in America. Their house smelled like garlic bread and clean laundry. A baseball game played softly in the other room. There were school photos stuck to the fridge and unopened mail sitting near the coffee maker. Ordinary things. But when your own home stops feeling safe, ordinary starts feeling sacred. David Sullivan asked me a few gentle questions, and somewhere in the middle of answering, I broke apart again. I kept apologizing for crying until Karen finally reached across the table and said, "Honey, you do not have to apologize for being scared." I still remember that sentence. Because nobody had spoken to me like I was worth comforting in a very long time, and they didn't hesitate. Didn't disappear into another room for some giant family discussion. David looked at Karen, then back at me, and said, "You can stay here until we figure this out." Just like that. I think I said thank you 20 times in the next 5 minutes. I moved into their guest room that weekend with 2 duffel bags, a backpack, and this constant fear that one wrong move would make them change their minds too. But they never did. That family saved me in ways bigger than housing. They gave me structure. Dinner at 6. Questions about homework. Somebody reminding me to grab a jacket before it snowed. Somebody noticing when I looked tired. It sounds small until you grow up without it. And slowly, for the first time since I was little, I stopped feeling like somebody people had to tolerate and started feeling like somebody worth keeping around. Looking back now, I think survival became my full-time job before I was even old enough to drive. A few months after moving in with the Sullivans, I got a part-time job at a coffee shop about 5 miles from school. Nothing glamorous, burned espresso, early mornings, feet hurting before noon. I learned how to smile at impatient customers before sunrise and how to stretch $15 in tips across an entire week. Most nights I came home smelling like coffee beans and bleach cleaner, then stayed up finishing homework at the Sullivan kitchen table long after everybody else went to bed. And honestly, there were still nights I cried in private. People love those comeback stories where somebody gets knocked down once and suddenly becomes fearless. Real life doesn't work like that. Real healing is quieter, slower. Sometimes it's just waking up every morning and deciding not to quit out of pure stubbornness. That's what those years felt like. I stopped waiting for my father to change. And honestly, that was probably the real beginning of my adult life. Not graduation, not turning 18. letting go of the fantasy that someday he'd wake up and become the man I needed him to be. Once I accepted that, something in me got sharper. I took classes at community college because it was what I could afford. I worked weekends, summers, holidays. I drove an old Toyota with a driver's side window that got stuck halfway down every winter in Missouri. There were months I counted gas money down to quarters. Months where buying takeout felt irresponsible. But little by little, my life stopped feeling temporary. Eventually, I transferred to the University of Missouri and finished my degree. And funny enough, I became a school counselor. People always smile when I tell them that part, but honestly, it makes perfect sense to me. Kids know when an adult actually means it when they say, "You can talk to me." I could spot the exhausted ones immediately, the quiet kids carrying too much at home, the teenagers pretending they didn't care whether anybody noticed they were struggling. Because I used to be one of them. Somewhere during those years, life finally stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like possibility. That's when I met Ryan. Not in some dramatic movie moment either. His niece attended an after-school family event I helped organize, and while most parents rushed out the second it ended, Ryan stayed behind helping me stack folding chairs in a cafeteria that smelled like pizza and floor wax. He made me laugh so hard I snorted Diet Coke through my nose, and instead of acting embarrassed for me, he laughed even harder. And honestly, that mattered more than people realize. He was steady, calm. The kind of man who returned shopping carts and remembered little things you said 3 weeks earlier. And one night, sitting on the tailgate of his truck under a cold October sky, I finally told him about my father. I still remember bracing myself for the usual response. Forgive him. Move on. He did his best. But Ryan didn't say any of that. He just looked at me and said, "Lauren, none of that was your fault." And I think part of me had been waiting years to hear somebody say that out loud. For a long time, that felt like the end of the story. Me, Ryan, our little house in Missouri, and eventually Ethan with his wild curls and nonstop questions about literally everything. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And honestly, when you grow up the way I did, peace starts feeling almost luxurious. I got protective of it. Maybe too protective sometimes. Then a few months before Ethan's birthday, little things started happening that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. One night I noticed my father had liked an old family photo on Facebook. Then another one a few days later. Pictures of Ethan. Vacation photos. Little moments he had absolutely no business quietly watching after disappearing for over a decade. No message, no apology. Just those tiny digital footprints showing up where they didn't belong. At first, I ignored it. I told myself maybe it meant nothing. Maybe somebody accidentally clicked something while scrolling late at night. But deep down, I already knew better. Then a cousin I barely talked to messaged me out of nowhere, asking if we still lived in the Kansas City area. A few days later, another relative suddenly wanted to catch up, and it all felt connected in that strange way women sometimes sense danger before they can fully explain it. Like the air pressure changes before a storm. I remember standing in the kitchen one night staring at my phone while Ryan loaded the dishwasher behind me, and this awful feeling just settled into my chest. Because people like my father rarely come back because they've changed. Usually they come back because they want something. And honestly, I think part of me already knew peace was about to get interrupted again. I should have trusted that feeling. The morning of Ethan's birthday started out beautiful. One of those clear Missouri afternoons where the sun feels warm even though there's still a little cold hiding in the air. Ryan had burgers on the grill by 11, music drifting through the backyard, and kids were already tearing across the grass before half the parents even got their coats off. Ethan was so excited he could barely stand still long enough for me to button his little plaid shirt. I remember standing near the patio table trying to keep frosting from sliding off the dinosaur cake while Megan laughed at me for taking birthday photos like a completely possessed mother. And for a few hours, everything felt normal, safe. That word meant more to me than most people probably realized. Then around 1:30, the side gate creaked open. It wasn't loud. Honestly, nobody else probably even noticed it at first. But something inside me tightened before I fully looked up. Instinct, maybe. The kind your body develops after spending years learning how fast peace can disappear. I turned toward the gate expecting another daycare parent running late. Instead, I saw my father standing there. He looked older, of course, more gray around the temples, thicker around the waist. The kind of tired, successful men wear after spending years blaming everybody else for their problems. But I recognized him immediately. And somehow, that hurt more than if I hadn't. He was holding this shiny birthday gift bag with cartoon tissue paper sticking out of the top, like showing up with a toy erased 16 years of silence. And for one weird second, the whole world kept moving normally around him. Kids screaming down the inflatable slide, somebody cracking open another beer near the grill, country music humming through the speakers. But inside me, everything went cold. My father smiled the second he spotted Ethan. Not me, Ethan. Like he'd walked into a family barbecue he attended every 4th of July instead of crashing the birthday party of a grandson he'd never even met. "There's my grandson," he said. And I still remember how those words landed in my chest. Not emotional, not warm, heavy, wrong, like hearing somebody claim ownership over a life they never helped protect. Ryan noticed my face almost immediately. He walked over beside me carrying a spatula in one hand, calm as always, but I could feel the shift in him too. That quiet alertness good men get when they realize somebody just brought trouble into their home. And my father introduced himself to Ryan like they were meeting under perfectly normal circumstances. Smiling, relaxed, talking about traffic. And the whole time, all I could think was how terrifying it is when somebody who shattered your childhood still believes they deserve comfortable access to your life. I didn't want a scene in front of the kids, so I asked him to walk with me toward the far end of the yard near the fence line where the music sounded softer and people couldn't hear us clearly over the party noise. Ryan started to follow, but I gave him a quick look that said, "Just give me a minute." And honestly, part of me still thought maybe my father was there for something human. Maybe age had softened him. Maybe getting older had finally forced some kind of regret into him. People tell themselves stupid little hopeful lies like that sometimes, even after years of disappointment. For the first minute or two, he played the role perfectly. He looked around the backyard and nodded like he approved of my life. Said the house was nice. Said Ethan seemed like a great kid. Talked about how fast time flies when you get older. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like a man trying on warmth instead of actually feeling it. Then his voice changed. Not dramatically, just enough. He lowered it slightly and started talking about how he'd been having a rough stretch financially. Said business got complicated. Bad investments, wrong partners, the economy. Excuses stacked on top of excuses until finally he got to the real reason he came. He needed money. A lot of money. And when he said $75,000, I honestly thought I misheard him at first. The number sounded so absurd standing beside a bounce house and a folding table full of Capri Suns that my brain almost rejected it. I asked him to repeat it. And he did. Calmly. Like he was asking me to help cover a medical bill instead of demanding more money than I made in some entire years of my 20s. Then came the part that turned my stomach. He started talking about everything he sacrificed, raising me. Said parenting wasn't free. Said he put a roof over my head when I was younger and maybe now it was time for me to give something back. I just stared at him. Really stared at him. Because in that moment I realized something that honestly should have hit me years earlier. My father didn't remember my childhood as abandonment. He remembered it as an investment that failed to pay him back. And standing there in my own backyard with Ethan laughing maybe 30 feet away near the inflatable slide, I felt the last tiny piece of guilt I'd carried for that man finally die inside me. And honestly, the worst part was how normal he sounded while saying it. That's the thing people don't always understand about manipulation when it comes from family. It rarely sounds cruel in the moment. Usually, it sounds reasonable, calm, almost practical. Like you're the selfish one for resisting it. My father leaned against the fence like two adults were discussing taxes at a backyard barbecue. He told me $75,000 wasn't life-changing for somebody like me anymore. Said Ryan and I had a nice house, stable jobs, savings. At one point, he even glanced toward the patio furniture like he was mentally pricing pieces of my life. Then he hit me with the line manipulative parents always reach for when they run out of real leverage. After everything I did for you? I actually laughed once under my breath when he said it, and I think that surprised him. Not because it was funny, because suddenly I could hear the entire conversation clearly for what it really was. He wasn't asking me for help. He was trying to collect emotional debt from a child he abandoned. I asked him if he was seriously standing at his grandson's birthday party trying to invoice me for surviving my own childhood, and his face tightened immediately. That calm little mask slipped just enough for me to finally see the irritation underneath. Then he told me I was too emotional, which honestly felt almost nostalgic. Men like him always call women emotional the second the truth becomes inconvenient. And after that, his tone changed completely. Harder, colder. He said families take care of each other. Said I owed him respect, owed him consideration, owed him loyalty, owed. He kept repeating that word over and over like if he said it enough times, it would magically become true. And standing there listening to him talk, I realized something that probably should have hit me years earlier. My father had never understood love unless it came attached to control. And when guilt stopped working, he shifted into intimidation so smoothly it honestly made my skin crawl. He lowered his voice and glanced back toward the party like he was doing me some kind of favor by keeping things private. Then he said he hoped we could handle this the easy way, because otherwise he was prepared to explore legal options. Legal options. I actually remember blinking at him for a second because the sentence sounded so insane standing there beside a cooler full of juice boxes and melting ice. Then he started throwing around phrases like family assets and what's owed and things that could get complicated in court. None of it made sense. Not legally, not morally. But that wasn't the point. The point was pressure. My father spent my entire childhood teaching me that peace could disappear the second I disappointed him. And standing there in my own backyard, I realized he still thought I was that terrified 16-year-old girl desperate to avoid conflict. Then he made one final mistake. He smiled. Not warmly, not sadly, confidently, like he genuinely believed if he pushed hard enough, eventually I'd fold just to make him stop. And something inside me went completely still after that, because suddenly I could see the whole pattern clearly. The guilt, the manipulation, the threats. It had never really been about love. It was always about control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore. That was the exact moment I stopped trying to salvage the conversation, not the threat, not the money, the smile. Because I'd seen that smile before when I was a teenager. Back when he thought pressure automatically made him the winner. Back when he believed exhaustion and fear would eventually make me surrender just to keep the peace. Only this time, I wasn't 16 anymore. I looked past him for a second and saw Ethan near the inflatable slide holding a paper plate with cake smeared across the edge. Ryan was watching us from the grill now, trying not to step in too soon but already reading the danger written all over my face. And suddenly, the whole situation became incredibly simple to me. This man was not standing in my backyard because he loved me. He was standing there because he believed access to me was still something he owned. I looked him straight in the eye and said, very calmly, "You have 5 minutes to leave my property." No yelling, no shaking voice. Just done. And honestly, I think that shocked him more than if I'd screamed. He blinked at me like he genuinely couldn't process what he'd just heard. Then he gave this small, irritated laugh and glanced back toward the party. "Lauren," he said quietly, "don't make a scene in front of your little family." My little family. The nerve of that almost knocked the air out of me, because the truth was, this family existed in spite of him, not because of him. Ryan, Ethan, the life we built, the peace we fought for. None of it came from him. And standing there in my own backyard, I understood something for the first time in my life. Boundaries don't feel cruel when you're protecting something worth keeping safe. But my father still thought he could push past me if he stayed confident long enough. That was always his strategy. Ignore the boundary until the other person got too exhausted to defend it anymore. He glanced toward the back door and said, "Maybe we should continue this conversation inside where it's quieter." Like he was still entitled to walk through my kitchen, sit at my table, exist comfortably inside a life he abandoned years ago. I told him no, clear, firm, final. And he stepped toward the house anyway. That's the part that unsettled me most. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't shove me or raise his voice. He just moved forward with the casual confidence of somebody who genuinely believed my boundaries were temporary inconveniences instead of actual limits. My whole body reacted before my brain even caught up. I stepped in front of him immediately, and he sighed like I was embarrassing him, told me I was overreacting, said he only asked for help and didn't understand why I was making things hostile. Hostile. Honestly, that word almost made me laugh, as if showing up uninvited after 16 years, demanding $75,000, and threatening legal action at a child's birthday party counted as normal fatherly behavior. By then, people around the yard had started noticing something was wrong. Conversations got quieter. The music suddenly sounded too loud. I could feel people looking over from different corners of the backyard trying to figure out what was happening, and my father noticed it too. That's when he shifted into performance mode. His posture changed, his voice softened just enough. Then he said loudly, "I'm only trying to talk to my daughter privately." Like I was the unstable one, like he was the wounded parent trying to reconnect. And God. I knew that game well. Because when I was younger, I used to spend hours trying to explain myself to people after he'd already rewritten the story first. Not this time. He moved toward the house again, and this time I grabbed his wrist hard enough to stop him. Not to hurt him, to stop him. To physically make it impossible for him to take one more step toward my home or my child. And everything around us seemed to freeze at once. I could feel his skin twisting under my fingers. Thin. Older than I remembered. He jerked back in surprise, looking more offended than scared. "Do not take another step," I said, and I meant every single word. Behind me, I heard Ryan setting the grill tools down. Slow, controlled, the kind of calm movement that usually comes right before somebody decides exactly how far they're willing to go for the people they love. And my father finally looked around the yard, realizing something that should have been obvious the second he walked through that gate. I was not alone anymore, and this was not the house of a frightened 16-year-old girl he could intimidate into silence. That was the moment the entire performance started falling apart for him. Because manipulators only stay powerful while people are confused about what they're seeing. And suddenly, nobody in that backyard looked confused anymore. Megan was already moving toward Ethan and the other kids, steering them back toward the bounce house with that calm mom voice people use when they're trying not to scare children. David Sullivan stood up slowly from his folding chair near the patio, and honestly, Something about seeing him there almost wrecked me emotionally. 16 years earlier, that man helped carry my bags into his home after my own father threw me away. And now he was standing between my family and the same man all over again. Ryan stepped beside me then. Not aggressive, not loud, just solid, certain. I could still feel the heat coming off him from standing over the grill all afternoon, and my father looked around the yard realizing the entire room had shifted against him. You could actually see it happen. That smug confidence started cracking around the edges. His breathing changed. His voice got sharper. Suddenly, he was pointing at the red marks already forming on his wrist, saying I'd assaulted him. But nobody reacted the way he expected, because decent adults know the difference between self-defense and intimidation. And for the first time in his life, my father was losing control of the narrative in real time. Nobody rushed to comfort him. Nobody told me to calm down. Nobody asked me to hear him out. The people standing in that backyard knew me. They knew my marriage. They knew the kind of mother I was. And standing there with paper birthday decorations blowing across the grass behind us, my father finally realized something that terrified men like him. He couldn't isolate me anymore. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it. That once he walked out of my backyard humiliated, reality finally caught up to him and he disappeared for good. But men like my father don't give up control quietly, especially not after people witness them fail. 2 days later, I was standing at the mailbox in sweatpants and one of Ryan's old hoodies when I saw the envelope, law office return address, and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. There's a certain kind of fear that never fully leaves your body once you grow up around emotional instability. Your nervous system learns to recognize danger before your brain even has time to explain it. I stood there in the driveway, reading the letter while cold wind pushed dead leaves across the concrete. According to the attorney representing my father, I was allegedly withholding $75,000 connected to prior family financial arrangements and assets. The wording was polished enough to sound official, but vague enough to avoid saying anything concrete, which honestly made it feel even slimier. It was fiction dressed up in legal language. The letter implied I had obligations to him, suggested I'd acted unfairly, warned that further legal action could follow if we failed to resolve the matter privately. Privately. That word made me feel sick immediately, because secrecy had always been where my father did his best work. I walked back into the kitchen and handed the letter to Ryan without saying a word. He read maybe half a page before his jaw tightened in that quiet way it does when he's angry enough to stop talking altogether. Then he looked at me and said something I will never forget. "We're done letting him scare you." Not calm down, not maybe it'll blow over, not he's still your dad. Just that. We're done letting him scare you. And honestly, something inside me finally exhaled after hearing it. By that afternoon, we had an appointment with an attorney in Kansas City named Michelle Harper. Sharp woman. No nonsense. The kind of person who could dismantle a liar in under 5 minutes without ever raising her voice. She read the letter once, leaned back in her chair and said, "This isn't a real case. This is intimidation wearing a necktie." And hearing somebody say that out loud almost made me emotional right there in her office. Because for years my father survived by making me question my own reality. But suddenly, sitting under fluorescent office lights with legal pads spread across a conference table, his threats started shrinking into exactly what they really were: desperation, ego, and a man furious that his daughter no longer feared him enough to obey. After that meeting, something shifted inside me. Not confidence exactly. More like clarity. For most of my life, every conflict with my father happened inside emotional fog. Confusion, guilt, fear. He was always better at controlling the atmosphere than the actual facts. But Michelle didn't care about atmosphere. She cared about evidence. And evidence tells the truth even when people don't. Over the next few days, our dining room table started looking like some kind of detective board for my entire childhood. File folders everywhere, old paperwork, coffee cups stacked beside legal pads. Ryan literally bought extra printer ink at 10 o'clock one night because we kept running out. At first, I honestly didn't think I had much. Then memory started opening doors I'd kept shut for years. I found old school emergency contact forms listing David and Karen Sullivan instead of my father. Tax returns from my first jobs when I was 16 and 17. Financial aid paperwork showing no parental support. Emails from school counselors asking where my legal guardian was. Even messages from relatives quietly admitting everybody knew my father had basically started over without me years ago. And every document felt strange in my hands, like touching physical proof that my childhood actually happened the way I remembered it. That matters more than people realize, because when you grow up around manipulation long enough, part of you starts doubting your own memory. You start wondering if maybe you exaggerated things. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you misunderstood. Then suddenly you're holding paperwork dated 16 years earlier proving you were essentially abandoned as a minor. And after that, there's really no room left for self-deception anymore. Michelle organized everything with almost frightening efficiency. She built timelines, highlighted inconsistencies in his claims, flagged every statement that could establish harassment or coercion. Honestly, watching her work felt weirdly therapeutic, because she never once treated my father's behavior like some complicated family misunderstanding. She treated it like what it actually was: a man trying to pressure somebody through intimidation and emotional leverage. Meanwhile, my father started calling from blocked numbers, not constantly, just enough to invade my peace. Sometimes he sounded furious, sometimes wounded, sometimes weirdly calm in that rehearsed way manipulative people get when they're trying to sound reasonable for the record. I saved every voicemail, Michelle told me to, and one message especially stayed with me. He said he never wanted lawyers involved, but after I humiliated him in front of everybody, I had left him no choice. And there it was. The truth. Not money, not family assets. Humiliation. His ego got injured publicly, and now he wanted punishment disguised as legal action. When Michelle heard that voicemail, she leaned back in her chair and smiled a little. Not because it was funny, because motive matters. And my father had practically gift-wrapped his. Around the same time, people from the party slowly started reaching out. A neighbor offered to give a statement if we needed one. One of the daycare moms texted asking if I was okay. Megan was furious in that deeply personal way old friends get when somebody hurts. The person they watched rebuild herself from nothing. But late at night, after everybody went home and Ethan was asleep, I'd still stand quietly in his doorway sometimes, just watching him breathe. Because underneath all the paperwork and legal strategy, the real thing I was fighting for was actually very simple. I was trying to make sure the fear stopped with me. That my son would grow up never once wondering whether love could suddenly disappear the second he became inconvenient to somebody. A few days later, Michelle sent the formal response rejecting every claim my father had made. Clean, precise, brutal in that professional lawyer way, where every sentence sounds polite while quietly destroying somebody's entire argument. And for the first time since he showed up at Ethan's birthday party, I could finally breathe a little. But something still kept bothering me. Not fear, exactly. More like exhaustion. Because people like my father survive in silence, in private phone calls, in vague family gossip. In that uncomfortable social pressure that tells women to keep things classy while somebody else rewrites the story behind their back. I remember sitting at the kitchen counter after Ethan went to bed scrolling through old family photos on Facebook while the dishwasher hummed softly in the background. Ryan was reading beside me on the couch, and I kept thinking about how hard I worked to build a peaceful life, and how quickly one manipulative person could try contaminating it with lies. Then something hit me. I wasn't ashamed of the truth anymore. He should have been. So I opened Facebook and started typing. Nothing dramatic. No screaming. No revenge fantasy. Just facts. I wrote that the father who abandoned me as a teenager had shown up uninvited at my son's birthday party asking for $75,000, threatened legal action after I refused, and was now trying to pressure me through false claims after years of choosing not to be part of my life. That was it. No exaggeration, no name-calling, no performance. And honestly, my hands were shaking a little before I hit post, because part of me was still that 16-year-old girl terrified of making adults angry, but the response came fast. Friends, neighbors, parents from school, old classmates, people I hadn't spoken to in years, and almost every message carried the same energy. We believe you. And I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that until it finally happened. After that, things started unraveling for my father faster than I think he ever expected. Because the problem with people who build their lives around control is that once the truth escapes the room, they can't manage it anymore. About a week after my Facebook post, Michelle got a call from my father's attorney asking if we'd be willing to discuss resolution. I actually laughed when she told me, resolution. Funny how quickly legal threats turn into negotiations once somebody realizes the other side has evidence. Michelle shut it down immediately. She told them we weren't interested in quiet little conversations anymore. If they wanted this over, every claim needed to be fully withdrawn in writing. No ambiguity, no future filings, no games. At first, they pushed back. Then suddenly, they didn't. Because there was never a real case. There was just a man desperate to regain control after being told no in front of witnesses. And once people around him started hearing the full story, the cracks spread everywhere. Family members who spent years avoiding conflict suddenly stopped defending him. One cousin quietly admitted this wasn't the first time he'd destroyed relationships over money. Even the woman he'd been living with reached out to me privately. She said she knew our relationship was strained, but she never realized he abandoned me as a child or tried pressuring me financially afterward. A few weeks later, I heard she moved out. And honestly, I didn't feel victorious hearing any of it. Just tired, because by then I understood something important about karma. It usually doesn't arrive like lightning. It arrives like erosion. Slowly. One consequence at a time until the version of yourself you spent years protecting finally collapses under the weight of reality. Eventually, the lawsuit disappeared completely. The calls stopped. The blocked numbers stopped. Even my father stopped trying to contact me. And somewhere in the quiet after all of it, I realized the thing he'd really lost wasn't the case. It was access. Access to me. Access to Ethan. Access to the version of my life he thought he could still walk into whenever it became useful for him again. Life eventually became quiet again after that. Not movie-ending quiet. Not the kind where everything suddenly heals overnight while soft music plays and people magically become better versions of themselves. Real quiet. Ordinary quiet. School lunches in the morning. Grocery runs on Sunday afternoons. Ryan falling asleep halfway through a baseball game while Ethan built blanket forts in the living room. And honestly, that kind of peace means more to me now than happiness ever used to. Because when you grow up never fully trusting love, stability starts feeling almost miraculous. Every once in a while, I still think about the girl I was at 16. Sitting awake in that dark bedroom after my father told me I had 10 days to disappear from his life. Back then, I truly believed being abandoned meant there was something wrong with me. I don't believe that anymore. Now I understand something I really wish more people our age had been taught growing up. Family is not the person who shares your last name. Family is the person who stays, the person who protects your children when things get ugly. The person who sits beside you at a kitchen table sorting through painful memories at midnight because they refuse to let you carry them alone. The people who make room for you when it would have been easier not to. And maybe that's the real reason my father lost in the end. Not because I fought harder. Not because I embarrassed him publicly. But because I finally stopped protecting him from the consequences of who he had always been. And once I did that, the fear he built my childhood around lost the only thing that ever kept it alive. My silence. And honestly, I think that's the most important lesson in all of this. Real family is built through love, protection, and consistency. Not blood alone. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the very people who are supposed to protect us, and healing begins the moment we stop chasing their approval. What truly saves people is usually something much quieter. A safe home. Somebody who listens. A friend who stays. A partner who believes you. As you get older, peace becomes more valuable than pride, and boundaries stop feeling cruel once you realize they're actually an act of self-respect. Because in the end, protecting your emotional well-being isn't selfish. It's how cycles of pain finally stop.